Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Matthew from Impact Innovation Group, and we're working with the Queensland Government to deliver a series of webinars on behalf of the Office of Small Business. Today's topic is the process of building innovation into your business with our guest presenter, Cherie van Wensveen from Impact Innovation Group. Just while we're waiting for other people to connect into the webinar, I'll go through some of the tools we'll be using for those who haven't used or viewed a webinar using the Citric GoToWebinar system before. Your screen should look like this: a slide in the center and a control panel or dashboard on the right. This control panel will collapse automatically when you're not using it, so to keep it open, just click the View menu up the top and uncheck the Auto Hide control panel. During the webinar, we might ask you a question or two, so just so that we can better understand your experience and to get feedback from you during the actual presentation. We ask you to raise your hand by clicking this blue button. Remember to lower your hand afterwards just by clicking on the icon again. There is also an opportunity for you to ask questions. So when the webinar can flow smoothly, we'll stick to the time allocated. We'd prefer to answer all questions at the end of the webinar. But please feel free to send us your questions throughout the presentation. Just so we can test this function currently, can you all just click the button and raise your hand just to test if it works? Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. We also have some handouts for you, which you can access by downloading and clicking on this section here. Cherie has kindly agreed to share her slide deck with us, and that's where you can access it. Now, please don't forget to download these documents before you leave the webinar, as they've been specifically prepared for you to better understand today's content. They will not be able to download after the webinar, so make sure you download them during or before the presentation. So now it's time to bring on our presenter. Cherie is an intellectual property specialist with over 11 years experience, including 6 years in innovation and commercialization management. Her more recent commercial roles have involved developing and implementing commercialization management plans based on sound IP strategy, R&D project prioritization, and pipeline management. Her approach has been to enable successful commercialization through alignment of the innovation strategy with desired business outcomes. Cherie is a registered patent and trademarks attorney and an active member of the Licensing Executive Society of Australia and New Zealand, the Institute of Patent and Trademark Attorneys, and the American Chemical Society. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry and a PhD in Hydrometallurgy from Murdoch University and a Master's of Intellectual Property Law Management from the University of Melbourne. So Cherie, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks very much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sacrificing your lunch breaks to listen to me. So as John mentioned, I'm here today to talk about how to build the process of innovation into your business. And I would like to open today's presentation with a bit of a quote from John W. Gardner. I like this quote because I think that it really resonates with the why behind the need for continuous innovation. And in particular, despite the fact that this book that the quote has come from was published way back in 1964, even back then, Mr. Gardner could see that innovation in the context of doing things in a new and better way underpins sustainability and survival, not only for businesses, but civilizations as a whole. So that's just an interesting quote, and I do encourage people to read this book. It's actually a fantastic book, and it's not that long, but if you do have time and you are interested, then do check it out. I think it's still very relevant today. So with a more Queensland context, I think that one of the drivers for innovation is reflected by some of the statistics that I've been able to pull out from the ABS. In particular, the fact that in the last decade or so, the employment by small business in Queensland has fallen by more than 10%. And also, as of the end of financial year last year, or 2016, 3 in 5 small businesses are actually non-employing. But I actually think that this actually presents a really good opportunity, given that 97% of all business in Queensland comprises small business. I think this is a great opportunity for potential growth, and if we can help small businesses to become more innovative and grow, that could well really contribute to Queensland's economic output going forward. So often when we start to talk to businesses about innovation, they immediately start to think of companies like Apple and Google and Tesla and Uber and Airbnb, and they think that innovation is synonymous with being disruptive and having a disruptive technology and having to develop new and radical technologies. But I don't think that innovation is just about disruption, and I'm pretty sure that all of you on the line probably agree with that. In fact, I don't even think it's really about new invention most of the time either, and that's an area of contention amongst academic circles. But certainly my view is that without wanting to be caught up on definitions, I really believe that innovation is centred in creating value for your business and your customers, by doing things in a better way to how you might have traditionally done them before. So for small businesses with limited resources, this might simply mean starting with assimilating existing technologies into your business to improve your efficiency. A good example of this is, a sole trader tradesperson or a tradesperson with a small business and a couple of employees, adopting some electronic timesheet software to save time on manual data entry, but also enabling him to capture data that he might not have captured prior, using in paper-based systems. And that might open up an opportunity for him to run some analytics on that data, which then might enable him or her to identify trends amongst customers, which might actually lead to a new improved service offering. So I don't think that necessarily you have to be developing whole new technologies and breaking into new markets immediately in order to be able to develop or get a benefit from innovation. For a real life example, we had a client who had a small family-owned mechanical equipment company. The owner's son, who had studied a bit of computer science along with his engineering at university, developed a software product to optimise the use of that equipment, which led to improved productivity for their customers. So they ultimately decided to test it with a few customers with great results, and they started to market it with a bit of enthusiasm, and they were very quickly overwhelmed by demand of this product. So what ended up happening was the team of 2 people who were allocated to install the equipment and calibrate it, or install the software with the equipment to calibrate it for the customers, couldn't keep up with the demand, and they were starting to realise that they were in danger of losing their market share due to emerging competitors coming out with similar products. So their immediate thought was to simply hire more technicians to help with the installation and increase their technician team by about 3 to 5 people full-time. However, when they went down the pathway of trying to use some innovation processes to evaluate that challenge, what they realised was that they could actually achieve relief for the installation team by adopting off-the-shelf tools that could be built into the software, which would allow for automatic calibration and allow actually the customers to set up this equipment themselves. So that in turn meant that the pressure for the installation team was reduced, which meant that they didn't have to hire people full-time immediately to get that relief. So, I mean, they could have definitely solved that problem in the short term by hiring more people. But by using that innovation process and engaging with different stakeholders and getting some idea flow coming through, they were able to generate a much more efficient solution, and they were able to save tens of thousands, if not upwards of $100,000 in salary costs to overcome that problem in the short term. So again, I don't think that being disruptive necessarily means that to be innovative as a small business, I don't think you need to be disruptive. So the key thing for all businesses, big or small, that I really want to drive home today is that regardless of your size, in order to really engage with the innovation process and get it working efficiently for you, you really need to build it into your business process. It's not an ad hoc type of activity, and if you do utilise it as an ad hoc type of activity, you probably aren't going to see the value or the return on investment. So today I would like to just quickly talk about, to provide a bit of an overview of what you can do within your business to help develop that process of innovation, so that it can become second nature and become embedded into the culture of your businesses. So we will start with an overview of the innovation funnel. Innovation doesn't have to be a grey area or a dark art, it's just that there is still a process behind it. Conversely, the fact that there is a process behind it doesn't mean that you are killing the creative spark. So the process really provides a framework for you to be able to enable those creative ideas, those really good ideas that can really have an impact on your business to come forward and rise to the surface and allow you to implement them. We'll cover off on setting some targets and understanding the reason why you're undertaking innovative activities in the first place. We'll discuss how you can build out an understanding of your competitive landscape as a means for understanding your innovation ecosystem, and how you can leverage that knowledge to create more value within your business. I'll also try and talk about a bit of the governance structures for your innovation system within your organisation, and the considerations for allocating resources and driving engagement through communication. So, and then finally, I'd like to touch on evaluating processes for ideas that are coming through your innovation system or through your business, and of course, the all-important measuring of the outcomes. So the innovation process is often represented as a funnel of varying degrees of similarity to this one. I like this one just because it's fairly simple, but I do want to emphasise that innovation doesn't have to be a linear process just because it's represented as kind of linear in a diagram. In fact, ideas will move back and forward within that funnel. They will also, the sides of the funnel, if you can imagine it, would be also quite porous, allowing ideas to flow in from the broader ecosystem, or allowing ideas to flow out of your business into the broader ecosystem. So you've got ideas coming in and ideas going out, and that might be through licensing of technology or ideas, a sale of a side business that you've started to establish and decided it isn't part of your ongoing targets going forward, or it might be via a collaboration with parties outside of your business. But generally, you'll have lots of ideas being fed through at the top or at the broad side of the funnel, and only a few really being approved for implementation at the other end. So the whole goal of this process is to really help you to whittle down to the really good ideas and not spend so much time focusing on trying to implement things that aren't going to really have a massive impact. So the ideas feeding into the front end can be sourced from within your business, or they can come from external sources. It might come from literature, research organisations, suppliers or customer links, and you might access those ideas through things like structured workshops, or through targeted relationship building, or through technology scouting, whether that's technology scouting that you do yourself or whether you hire a service provider to help you access specific databases to do that more broadly. It is important to understand that targeting the right ideas is dependent on articulating the right challenges that you want to overcome. And it is important to seek different perspectives in that process. And that might be either in different parts of your business, so engaging different business units or different expertise within your business, or it might involve going to your broader ecosystem and sort of trying to work with people outside of your business. But anyway, as part of your innovation process, you need to ensure that you're addressing the issues that will deliver the biggest impact. And I think that's especially important for small business because you just don't have the bandwidth to be chasing a lot of different ideas at once. So ideas will flow down various assessment pathways and end up in the evaluation process. And that evaluation criteria will be designed, those pathways and the criteria that you assess in those ideas against within those pathways will be custom to your business. So they'll fit your style of business and how you run your business. And that includes things like how you will make decisions or how you do make decisions, what your budget restrictions are, how big your organisation is, and you know, what industry sector you are sitting in at the moment. And what the innovation process does is the whole process is really designed to help you build information around ideas. So as those ideas flow through that funnel, you're building information around those ideas, and in an iterative process, you are replacing ideas with facts, and so that you can feel a lot more confident about the decisions that you make around those ideas. And then finally, once those ideas survive the evaluation process, they are hopefully ultimately implemented in accordance with your business strategy and targets, which I'll talk again about later. And you can, sorry, I think I just got muted. Can people still hear me? If you can just raise your hand to let me know that you can still hear me, because I think I just got muted. Excellent, thanks. So what was I saying? In order to really understand, so ultimately you want to be able to track, you know, it's all well and good to want to be doing innovation and you set up your processes and things like that, but ultimately the purpose is to really understand what value you're getting from this activity. And so by setting up these evaluation processes and setting up these criteria and then tracking things once they exit the funnel, you can actually, you know, really measure your return on investment. So in order to understand what your process steps should look like, you need to first understand what it is that you want to focus on to take your business forward and what success looks like for you. So for example, if you haven't really articulated what you want to address in your business or what direction you want to head in, it can kind of be difficult to understand what ideas that you should be sourcing and where you should be sourcing them from. So it's really hard to even start the process if you don't have that visibility about where you're going. So when thinking about why you need or want to do this, there are a few factors that you can consider. You can think about how this activity is going to create value for you or how you want it to create value for you. You can think about how it will create value for the customer. And there might be other aspects like social benefits that, that might be important to you or that are a consequence of you running your businesses in a more innovative way. Or you might be a social enterprise, in which case, you know, social benefits will be a key aspect. So then you look at what is success. Okay, so these are the things that I want to get out of it, but what does success really look like? Is it getting more uptake in your existing market? Maybe it's accessing adjacent markets, or it's branching out into complementary services. It might be getting a broader geographical spread, or it might be some financial metrics that you are trying to hit. And if so, is it more about for you finding cost efficiencies rather than increasing capacity for sales? You know, maybe you're at a size that you're comfortable with and you don't want to grow, but maybe you want to find a way to do things better so that you can you know, you can generate more revenue and provide better products and services without necessarily having to become a behemoth large business. So what kind of innovation, then you need to think about what kind of innovation you want or need to target in order to meet those requirements that you're hoping to achieve. Do you need to develop new technology yourself? And if so, how much emphasis should you be placing on this versus adopting existing technologies, for example? So on this slide, I have a bit of a diagram, and these are, I mean, there's various iterations of this diagram on the internet, so feel free to Google and find out which ones sort of resonate with you. This is actually some data from a client previously who had started to, were reviewing their innovation system. So they were a small business, but they were established. They were already generating revenue. They've been in business for a few years. They had their business processes pretty much in place and functioning well. But they were looking to grow. They were looking to jump into some adjacent markets and broaden their customer base outside of the market that they were currently in. So what they decided to do was to think about their targets in terms of where they wanted their innovation focus to be. And in this particular example, they decided that, well, look, we're really focused on this adjacent market type of thing. They're similar products, but, there might be an incremental change, and it gives us an access to somebody that we haven't currently been able to access. So they decided that the majority of their effort was going to be focused on that type of innovation. Meanwhile, they knew that they still needed to continue to improve their internal processes and maintain their, obviously, core business activity and products and services. So they had a 30% target for innovation around those activities. And they also had, at this point, sort of decided that they had been generating revenue for enough years. They felt comfortable enough that they could continue to do so, and that they wanted to start thinking about some more transformational type innovation that could really take their business in a slightly different direction in the future. So they decided that they would start allocating some effort to generating or to looking at completely new technologies and maybe even investing in some early stage R&D. So that's that 10% in the transformational phase. So that was a mid-sized, a small to mid-sized business that was well established. If you've just started your business, or you haven't really built up that massive customer base yet, or maybe you've got a few customers and you're generating some revenue, but you don't really have your business structure set up or your business processes set up properly, you might think, well, actually my focus really should be, I should be focusing on my core business right now and building my customer base around my core business and trying to improve how I can run my business much more efficiently in the current market that I'm in. So you might have, a much greater focus on the core activities, and then you might have a view to the future, maybe in the 3 to 5 year mark, to start building out some adjacent markets. So you might consider allocating a little bit of effort to that, but maybe not too much. And if you're really, really new, you might not even think about transformational stuff just yet. You might really just be focused on building that core business and think, okay, well, maybe, in a couple of years' time, I can start building, when I review my innovation program again, which hopefully you will be doing on a regular basis, you can then think about building in some more transformational type innovations or developing completely new products. So that's the idea around setting your targets and the type of things that you want to think about. So in order to understand what your targets are going to be or should be, a good place to start is sort of thinking about your competitive landscape. And I've used the term competitive landscape here, but you can actually think of it as you can build this out to be sort of an innovation ecosystem for yourself, if you like, which I do encourage people to do. And this is really about understanding what your market is. And hopefully, if you've already started your business, hopefully you've already done this. And it's really about thinking about what your market position is and what your value proposition is and your differentiating factor. What's really going to entice the customers to buy your product or service? Do you know who your competitors are or your potential collaborators are? Do you know what technologies that are being developed in your space? Do you actively engage in activities to continuously stay abreast of all of this information? So are you attending trade shows or presenting at conferences or logging into webinars and seminars? Do you do any literature searching, and that includes patent and government records? Internet searching, I'm sure everyone does that on a regular basis. speaking with research organisations, really trying to understand where the centres of excellence for your sort of niche are, either within, not just necessarily within Australia, but or even within Queensland, but nationally as well. And are you engaging with your community and talking to other businesses? So, you know, there might be other businesses in your area who you have contact with that, you know, are facing similar problems to you. They might not be a competitor or collaborator, but they might, you know, if you're not connecting with them and understanding the problems that they're overcoming, you might be missing out on some really good insights on how to avoid those problems yourselves. So I've given you an example here of a couple of examples here of some competitive landscapes. One is by a company called Guru, who is an Australian company. They're actually in the recruitment field, and they use artificial intelligence and neuroscience to help predict how teams will behave in the future, and they'll help companies to match jobs to candidates, etc. And I just liked the map because it looked pretty, but I guess my emphasis is that you don't need to be doing stuff like this. It doesn't have to look like this in order for you to get some really decent information. In fact, the inset diagram there, which is the spreadsheet, is more than enough. You don't need to spend a huge amount of time on it, and this should be something that you should be building up over time anyway and updating as you go. But simply looking at who your competitors are, what features or traits they have in their business that are part of their service offering, comparing that to yours and understanding where your differentiation is. And then, you know, as you start building this out, you can start looking at adding into that spreadsheet potential collaborators. Same theory, you look at the features and the traits of them, their areas of expertise and how that might overlap with yours, and how you might work with them to develop something much better for your business. So, yeah, I think this is I want to drive home that it's a really good exercise to do, and people really should be doing this on a regular basis and just updating as they go. You don't need to spend a huge amount of time on it, or up front it might need a bit of time, but over time it's really just adding and updating. But it doesn't need to, you don't need special software. Simply a table will be more than sufficient for you to get a pretty good idea about where you sit and where your opportunities are. So then I also wanted to talk about governance, because once you've sort of started to figure out what direction you're going in, you've worked out what your targets are, and what you kind of want to get out of it, you need to then start really looking at, well, how am I going to make this part of my business, and how is this going to be embedded within my business? So having the right governance structures in place is really critical to that, and for any business process for that matter, not just innovation processes. So in its most simple form, the governance element really ensures that your organisation is structured to support your innovation activity, and who, you know, things like who is part of the team, where do they sit within the organisation, what technical expertise, you know, do you need to build out in that team? You know, if you're a small business, you might not, you know, you might be a sole trader, in which case you don't necessarily have a team, but you will certainly have people within your ecosystem who have expertise, and there'll be service providers that can form part of an advisory group, I guess, if you want to think about it that way, that you can call upon to help get things done and get clarity around certain ideas. So for smaller businesses, once you've identified who your potential collaborators and competitors are, you know, do you have an innovation activity scheduled into your regular agenda in terms of, you know, implementing this type of stuff? So, for example, you know, it might be you might just, if you're a sole trader, you might just be saying, okay, well, for now, I might just be setting aside a regular time slot to build relationships with my ecosystem, and that might be competitors and collaborators, or I might be going out and talking to research institutions. So that is, you've allocated your resources, that is you and your time, and a focus, which is aligned with your business goals and outcomes. And if you do have a couple of employees, you know, what kind of tasks can you build into their daily, weekly schedules that can support your innovation goals and help support that whole system so that you're not having to do everything, because as a business owner, you don't want to be doing everything, and that's kind of the whole point of doing this in the first place, is to really build in expertise from other people within your organisation. For medium to larger businesses, you know, you might be thinking about, you know, where does my innovation representative or team sit? And by the way, they don't actually have to have innovation in their title. In fact, if you're a small business, you might not want to have that. You don't need to restructure the organisational chart, and you don't need to give people different titles, because what might happen when you're introducing this stuff to start with, it might just be a fraction of their time that they start to build, you know, this kind of activity into their daily agendas. So does your organisational structure provide top-down endorsement of these activities and allowing people to spend time on them? Is there a process by which the responsible person, i.e. the innovation representative, can access the broader organisation? So do they have access to the rest of the employees to be able to drive that engagement? How much time are they expected to allocate to these activities? These are all things you need to think about when you're thinking about your governance structures. Do you have a communications plan in place? And I will talk about this a little bit more on the next slide. But, you know, are you communicating what your innovation strategy is to gain alignment from the key stakeholders in your organisation? A lack of communication of the strategy really does lead to inefficient implementation. I can't stress that enough. And a lot of the time you could be missing market opportunities just due to time lags and things getting caught up because people aren't aligned in agreement on things that are important. So, you know, for example, we did have another client a little while back who, you know, they were seeing they had some different ideas about where the business was headed. And they were all great ideas, and they never actually sat. You know, it was actually a family business, but they never actually sat each other down in a room and worked out what their strategy was going to be and what they were going to tackle first and how they were going to tackle things. So they ultimately, you know, struggled along for about 12 months, each of them having different views on what was important. And they started to build sort of mini empires around themselves and pulling teams together and, you know, really confusing people about what they should be spending their time on. And without having sat down and worked out what the strategy was going to be and who was going to do what, they didn't have any KPIs around the activities that they were undertaking. So they ended up sort of wasting a lot of resources, in fact, spinning their wheels for a long time until they sort of could come back together and go, okay, well, actually we're going to do this, and, you know, then we'll target that, and this is how we're going to do it. So having that governance structure is really important. So, and one key element, you know, that one of the outcomes for your governance should be helping to drive engagement of the program within your organisation. And a key to getting that engagement is really the communication piece. If people don't understand what they're doing, or they don't understand the process behind what they're doing and why they're doing it, it's very hard to get them to really focus on it in a consistent manner. So when we begin working with new clients who are setting up innovation systems, we advise that they work through a detailed communications plan to ensure that the right things are being communicated at the right time to the right people. And that's why having, you know, a documented innovation strategy and plan is important in the first place. So to identify what you need to be communicating. So, you know, in my wish list, you know, in an ideal world, you know, an organisation having put together a communication plan would at least identify things like, you know, what is the process and why is the organisation doing this? You know, if they're going to communicate, that'll be the first thing that they would communicate to the organisation. And they would be reminding them on a regular basis about that. They would include things like when challenges are going to be issued and by whom within the organisation, who's going to be invited to submit ideas, if not everyone, how long those challenges will run, what ideas they might communicate, build into their communications plan, what ideas have been submitted for discussion, what ideas have been successful, and what lessons they've learned from those ideas. And the lessons learned can be around, well, you know, successful ideas as well as unsuccessful ideas. So for a successful idea, you might understand what the lesson was around what made that idea successful, or maybe it was successful but there were some hiccups along the way. And then, of course, if an idea wasn't successful, understanding why it wasn't successful is really, really important, so that you're not, you know, making the same mistakes over and over again. You should also be including, as part of your communications plan, reporting of metrics up to senior management, understanding what your return on investment is, reporting of outcomes to the organisation to drive engagement, and communication of awards and incentives. And this is a really interesting one, because a lot of organisations do have awards and incentives, but they never actually communicate it. And you know, it's not really, it's a missed opportunity, really. You could be getting so much more engagement from your staff if you can, you know, really highlight that. So, and they don't necessarily have to be big things either. It's not always financial. So once you've started to build engagement, you need to start to establish how you're going to evaluate all these ideas that are awesome ideas that are going to be flowing through your innovation funnel. So those evaluation processes that you set up should be suitable to the type of idea that's being evaluated, and they should be customised to your business. So for larger organisations, this might require several pathways, and I've just given you an example here, completely made up, that I threw together. But you can see that there might be different types of ideas. You know, some might be ideas around internal business process, you know, which don't require a huge amount of investment. In fact, it might be as simple as something like putting a scanner in the mail room or something. I don't know. In which case, you don't need a very high level of approval for that idea, nor is it a huge upfront investment. But for the more transformational ideas, long-term, long time to implement, high-risk ideas, they might need a much more detailed process of evaluation and reporting and approvals. And then for smaller businesses, you know, this is still relevant for smaller business, but most of the time with smaller businesses, what I've seen is that almost every pathway will ultimately involve the owner to make a decision at some point. That's probably the only main difference. The steps of assessment might be less arduous than what you see on the screen here, but it is strongly advisable that whatever the process is, that you document it, and you document the outcomes for all of the ideas, regardless of how simple or how elaborate they are. And the reason for that is that if the idea does not get implemented due to bad timing, or the market's not right, etc., it could potentially be revisited at a later date. And if you haven't documented it, you might miss that opportunity if it arises. Staff often turn over, even if you are a small business. So if you have new people coming into the organisation, old people leaving, you don't want to lose all of that knowledge. And having things documented helps to set up precedents so that people coming into the organisation can see, you know, what's required, what the assessment process is, and what's required of them in either assessing an idea or submitting an idea, and what they need to put forward in order to get it through. So documenting helps with ensuring that resources aren't wasted on pursuing projects that have not been successful previously as well. So that was, you know, that's a big one that I've seen in multiple organisations, especially mostly bigger organisations where people, you know, have their pet projects and they have a budget for those projects, and they just go on and on and on and on. And, you know, before you know it, 5 years have gone by, they've spent $300,000 on developing a technology that has been superseded already and something else much better has gone into the marketplace, and they just didn't have that visibility on it because they weren't documenting things. There was no reporting requirement, there were no KPIs, and they weren't doing engaging in that ongoing competitive analysis and landscaping. So again, I just want to highlight that the process of evaluating ideas will be different. I'm not going to give you cookie cutter criteria that you would assess things by, but it does very much depend on your organisation, what your restrictions are, and what you're trying to achieve. So you do need to kind of think about, well, maybe I have 3 staff under me, and I want them to start making decisions about a few things, and I can give them a budget to do that. Resources then need to be allocated. If you're going to be evaluating ideas, you're going to be bringing people in to assess the ideas. You want to implement the ideas, but the key thing really is, really with any business, but particularly small business, resources are always in high demand. You don't have necessarily a huge amount of cash flow, lucky if you do, but you may not also have a lot of manpower either. So there's only so many hours in a day. You really need to think about what you can realistically achieve with the resources that you have. So that's that whole effectuation type philosophy. And the beauty of having that innovation program and system in place is that sometimes when you're saying yes to one thing, you have to say no to something else, and just having that visibility of what you're saying no to and understanding that, okay, they might have been both really great ideas and it would have been nice to implement them both, but maybe, you can just focus on the one that's really going to have the greatest impact in helping you to achieve your goals. How can you leverage your ecosystem? So can you bring knowledge in from outside of your organisation or within different areas of the organisation that you have, depending on how big you are? And how can you build your capability without actually having to have a cash investment, rather than having to go out and find an investor or raise more capital? What can you do with what you've got? And does that mean that the idea that you have, maybe it's an improved product with all these bells and whistles, maybe it's simply a case of going, okay, well, maybe we just build an MVP, we get it to the market quickly, test it, and then we can, if it sells, we can start to build out the ideal version of that. So those are things to think about as well, and when you're thinking about allocating resources. Using mistakes and failures to your advantage to identify new opportunities, that's a really big one as well. Making sure that people are, if you're setting up an innovation process and maybe you do have a couple of people working on it or, looking at it from time to time, making sure that you're also focusing on things that you might have already said no to, but, maybe just revisiting them every once in a while to make sure that any opportunities that have presented themselves in the meantime aren't being missed because, it's been put in the no bucket. And also, of course, tracking your expenditures and outcomes is highly important. And again, like the previous example I just gave you, if you're not tracking how much money you're spending on a particular project, it can get to years down the track and you've spent a lot of money on something that actually hasn't gone anywhere. So if you're tracking these things, they tend to be visible, and that doesn't happen. So making sure that you're not wasting resources basically on things that aren't really getting you towards your goals. And your goals might change over time. So you might get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through a project that's not really serving you anymore. Then, yes, you might have invested things in time and money up front, but is it worthwhile continuing with that if it's not really going to be part of your core focus going forward? So it's just about having visibility around that. Finally, so then talking about, tracking and measuring, a lot of questions we get are around, well, how do I measure innovation? The first thing, of course, that comes to mind for people is always the financial metrics, which is absolutely valid and totally fine, because at the end of the day, you want to be making sure that this is helping you to grow your business, not stifle it. So some common metrics that people might use financially would be return on investment, which is the amount that you invest versus the revenue that you generate. You might look at net present value, which is similar to ROI, but it takes into account how the value of the dollar changes over time. You might look at internal rate of return, which is the measure of how quickly you get a return on investment after you've made the initial investment. And then, of course, the other things like sales and revenues, accessing new markets, increasing your customer base, generating new products and services. They're all financial measures of innovation. The other segment is engagement. So in order to ensure that you've got a steady flow of ideas for your innovation program, and you want good ideas, you need to have that engagement with your staff and with any of your stakeholders that might be within your organisation or outside of your organisation. And ideally, you'll have those ideas flowing in from multiple areas, different business units at different times, and that ultimately leads to other peripheral benefits like improved productivity around business as usual type activities. It's not just around necessarily R&D and innovation. So that engagement piece really links really closely with culture. And if you're improving your culture, you're increasing your engagement with your staff, you're just going to get better outputs from them on a general basis, not necessarily just on new products and services. Engagement also relates back to your external stakeholders, as I mentioned, so your research organisation and your collaborators. This can be a measure of a success, particularly for those who are seeking to embed themselves in an ecosystem. So maybe you're trying to really make your mark in an ecosystem, or maybe you're stepping into you're building out a slightly different area of the ecosystem, and you want to make your mark in a particular sector or industry. So engaging with your external stakeholders and collaborating with them can really be a good way of achieving that. And, you know, ways to do that are to track who you're speaking to when and what you're speaking to them about. You know, and at what point do those external stakeholders actually become engaged in a project with you or a collaboration activity? And so that way, once you have that visibility on all that stuff, you can actually start to predict for future projects and refine your process of when you engage people and how you engage them in certain organisations. The next segment is, the segment of metrics is implementation, which is obviously a measure of the efficiency of your innovation program or the effectiveness and the stage gate process that you adopt for evaluating your ideas. So, for example, you might look at, for implementation, you might look at how many ideas you identify versus how many actually get implemented. A lot of organisations, as part of the engagement piece, might actually measure the number of ideas that are generated. But for implementation, it's really about understanding how well your innovation program is actually working, and allows you a point of reference for when you review your assessment processes and teams and things like, and the structure of your innovation program. So things that you might look at might include how long it takes to implement an idea once it enters the funnel, and the risk factors associated with the ideas that are implemented. So one problem that a lot of organisations have is when they implement an innovation program, what they find, the main complaint is, oh, we're getting all of these really sort of low-level, continuous improvement type ideas, but we really wanted some more transformational stuff. And a lot of the time, the reason for that is the assessment process and the criteria that those ideas are being measured against in their innovation program. So that's a good way to measure how well you're actually implementing your program. And there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of making sure that, you know, if you're not hitting the targets that you want to hit, then you're going back and you're reviewing what it is that you could change in order to be hitting those targets a bit better. And then the last one is adoption, which is a follow-on step to implementation. So measuring the adoption of the idea once it has been developed is a key metric that can show value of the innovation program to the rest of the organisation. So whether that's an internal process that gets released to the organisation and, you know, watching how people pick it up and run with it and actually implement it. By pursuing this as a measurable, you can actually your stakeholders then become a focal point of the innovation process. And I'm talking about internal stakeholders here, but it could be external as well. But what this really helps people with is to understand, well, okay, we got adoption of that, but there was a bit of a lag time. People didn't really pick up the process as quickly as we would have liked, and we didn't see the outcomes that we wanted to as quickly as we would have liked. Should we have actually engaged that stakeholder a little bit earlier? And should we have gotten them on board to help, you know, preen them, I guess you could say, get them ready for the release of the product or service or process so that it can be picked up a lot more easily. So it's important to remember that the significance of certain metrics, when I'm talking about all of these metrics now, but it's important to remember that certain metrics will change over time in the importance of them, depending on the maturity of your innovation program and the type of business that you have. So, for example, if you're an organisation that is implementing its first innovation program, you may want to place more emphasis on metrics around engagement and idea flow, compared to an organisation that maybe has been doing this for a few years now. They've already had some ideas flowing through their innovation funnel and assessment process, and now they're in a position where they can actually start measuring financial returns. But I can guarantee you, if you're starting out on an innovation program, whether you're a small or a large business, and you start trying to measure financial metrics from the very get-go, you're going to be very disheartened, and because it's not just about the benefits aren't just financial, and so you really need to have a view to the other types of benefits that your organisation is seeing as a result of the efforts on the innovation program and trying to do new things in a better way. So really I just wanted to, that's pretty much it from me in terms of how to build innovation into your business, and I think I've been talking for quite a while now. So I just want to highlight, though, again, that it really is about building this as a process into your normal business activity. You can run a hackathon, you know, once every 6 months and never actually see any results if you aren't actually implementing the activities that are required to drive those ideas that come out of those hackathons or workshops, etc., into an implementation state and helping you to grow your business. So you really need to be looking at developing a strategy around innovation and how that aligns with your business goals in the short, medium and long term. And of course, measuring and reviewing, measuring your outputs, but also reviewing the program itself and the processes that you've implemented and how you can change those to better meet your business needs. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much for that, Cherie. Really, really insightful about building that appropriate and balanced nature associated with innovation and not just kind of jumping into a hackathon without any idea of how to actually get some outcomes out of it. Now, we do encourage people to ask questions. We do have a few that have been emailed through, but please feel free to type them into the question section. We'll just start off with this one, Cherie. You mentioned small businesses can adopt technologies to help streamline data gathering and analytics to identify new markets. Do you have any suggestions on what software could manage or help manage innovation?
Yeah, look, I think as a small business, I don't think you really need to have any specific software. I think that, I've got feedback, John. But I think that certainly there are programs, there are specific innovation management programs, platforms that businesses do use. But I think if you're a small business, the best thing really to do is to just understand the key elements discussed today, and you could pretty much manage, if you're a sole trader or only have a few employees, you might actually be able to manage it quite well just with a spreadsheet. But certainly there are definitely a range of programs that bigger businesses do use, and as you do grow and you maybe end up with 100 employees plus, which probably rules you out of the small business, you probably would want to be looking at some dedicated fit-for-purpose innovation management platforms. There are a number of them on the market, and Bright Idea is one of them. That's one that we sell. That's what that's pretty much all I have to say about that, John.
Understood. Just on following on from that, you said that there's 3 different types of innovations depending on how outlandish and how on a high level the thinking is. Is there any industry in which certain innovation types are favoured, or can all industries or all sectors utilize these 3 levels of innovation?
Well, in fact, depending on how much you read, there are actually probably half a dozen more types of innovation. We just stick to the 3 main ones because we think that that's easier. But there are, in fact, people have written, academics all over the world have written papers and come up with a whole heap of different classification systems for different types of innovation. But I would say that across the board, in most industries, you're always going to have, with any business, you're going to have continuous improvement type innovations, and you're always at least going to have probably some incremental innovation. But I'd say that in most industries now, I mean, even industries like the construction industry and the mining industry, they've always been quite accused of being quite antiquated in their approach to adopting new technologies and being very slow at adopting new technologies. But certainly they are looking for more transformational type stuff with digital mining and that sort of thing as well. So, I'd say across the board, everyone's looking at, within their businesses, looking at trying to develop at least 2 of those 3 that I mentioned. And again, if you're a small business who's just starting out, you're probably not going to be too focused on the transformational stuff unless your business is a startup and you actually are starting because you have a transformational type technology. So,
okay. An interesting question, almost following on from that. So I have a medium-sized business, and my field team are always coming up with great and innovative ideas, but I don't have time to review them. So nothing ever really gets done. How do I create more time to look at these things?
That's kind of the sweet spot for an innovation program, really, is that, as I mentioned before when I was talking about the evaluation of ideas, as I mentioned, in a small business, ultimately probably, depending on whatever type of idea you're evaluating, regardless of the type of idea, you're probably going to have the last call. But perhaps what you can do is to use your innovation process, your assessment process, to help set up some structures that other people in your business, so perhaps the team, the technicians, can start to do a lot of the groundwork for you. So they will start to build out a heap. You might use a scorecard sheet, for instance, where you basically ask a heap of questions that they need to answer before you can actually make a decision about an idea. And if you're doing all of that work at the moment, then yeah, it's going to be very difficult for you because you've got to run the business as well. But perhaps the innovation program allows you to actually give the idea submitters a little bit more ownership over those ideas and help them to understand, to get clarity for themselves around, how does this actually improve the business and how does this contribute to the business? So I would say you need to be building in those sorts of questions to them, how long is it going to take to develop? How much do you think it's going to cost? What are the potential revenues? What are the potential customers for this particular product or service? Those are all things that they should be trying to answer as part of that evaluation process after they've submitted the idea. So hopefully if you set that up within your innovation program, that can actually reduce the amount of time that's required for you and actually give them some green light to take it forward.
Okay, unfortunately we'll have to end it there. So thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. Please remember to download the handouts that Cherie has provided before you exit. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Impact Innovation Group YouTube page, should you wish to view it again. You will receive a follow-up email just detailing the Office of Small Businesses, different programs and opportunities for small business available. But other than that, thank you very much, Cherie, for your time and insight into innovation processes, establishing and then small business. And thank you everyone else for tuning in and being engaged. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.